Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, nearly 3 hours long. Leonardo DiCaprio attended the premiere, and by the end, his date was too old for him. So...
SAR Experience.
So you just saw there Leonardo DiCaprio having the Mickey taken out of him a little bit by Ricky Gervais. But why so? What was the big deal? Well, maybe you don't know, but Leonardo DiCaprio has never dated a woman over the age of 25, and nowadays he's around 45, I guess, maybe a little bit more than that. And I think when this clip was shot, he was about 44, 45. And you probably heard about the half your age plus 7 rule for what's a socially acceptable age gap. So, you know, just say he was 44 at the time, 22 plus 7 would equal 29, and that's basically the reason why he's getting this social opprobrium, obviously there in the West, in the US, because the age gap is outside of that range of what's socially acceptable. So, greetings from Nova Kakhovka in the south of Ukraine, and right here in Eastern Europe, that social problem does not extend to that kind of age gap where a highly successful 44, 45-year-old man is dating a model in her early 20s. That doesn't carry the same social opprobrium here, but of course there is a limit on what age gaps that are acceptable also in Eastern Europe. And in today's video, I'm going to be explaining a bit more in depth and something that's going to be more tangible for you about how to understand age gap, because it's not really the age gap what's important. I saw a video by some other YouTubers and they come up with some strange odd number to explain, you know, what is the right age gap to have, and that seemed to me to just completely miss the point. The real issue is the value gap. So in today's Vodka Vodcast, welcome, Privyet, we are going to be going into exactly what the value gap is, how it relates to an age gap, and how you can obviously stay clear of making, you know, a big mistake if you come here to Ukraine and you start dating local women. It also applies for other parts of Eastern Europe like Russia, Belarus, Moldova, etc. So I'm here actually, to start off, I'm here in a vineyard in the south of Ukraine near to Kherson. It's just down the road, about an hour. I was there this morning. And this is the first vodcast I've actually shot for a while. Last ones were back up in Odessa, the last vodcast that I did for the channel. So it's been good to get out. You can see the weather is starting to improve here in Ukraine. We're actually going to have about 2 weeks ahead of us, apparently, according to the forecast. But I'm shooting this video in April, in about mid-April 2021, just for reference. You're wondering about the weather, but this is a beautiful place. So let me illustrate a little bit what I mean by value gap as opposed to age gap. Now, I remember it's good many years ago, I was in Munich. I was actually there as part of some studies I was doing. I was at a summer school about strategic studies, and we went out partying and stuff, and I met a girl, we'll say reasonably attractive for southern Germany, in her early 20s, and she had just met Mick Jagger when she'd been out partying. I think I met her during the day at a museum. And yeah, she'd been from the night before, and she was super excited, and seemed incredibly, I don't think turned on is the word, because obviously she wasn't there with Mick Jagger at the time, but she looked really impressed and seemed to have a lot of attraction for Mick Jagger. Obviously he's a very famous singer, he has a lot of status, guessing a lot of money as well, but the age gap must have been massive. Now there was probably, I mean, there was more than 40-year age gap between them, but she definitely seemed very attracted to him in that moment, at least. So really, is the age gap that important? Now there obviously we have Mick Jagger, whose value in this girl's eyes is extremely high, massive high. The guy's obviously a very famous, one of the most famous rock stars of all time, and everything that comes with that, and that rock star lifestyle. And then we have a German girl who's above average looking, but, you know, she's not, you know, the girls that Leonardo DiCaprio was dating, for example, you know, like Gisele Bündchen, one of the most famous international models, we'll say 10 years ago. So there you had very clearly a big value gap between this girl and Mick Jagger. And that seemed to completely negate any age gap, because obviously 40 years plus or minus, maybe it was more, is a massive age gap. So you're gonna hear a lot of people saying, oh, the age gap is more over 10 years or 15 years. And I'll dive into a little bit how age does affect your value and how it plays in a little bit later in the video, but that's not really the important element. You know, you could be a guy who's considered, I don't know, we'll say you're considered a 7 in, where we'll say you're American and you're in the US, right? So you're in California, you're considered a 7, and you're like 40 years of age, and you meet a girl who is 20 years of age, who's a 3, right? And she's interested in you. Well, there, I mean, obviously you have a pretty big value gap of, you know, we'll give me a 4 points out of 10. So, you know, the age gap is probably not going to be a massive issue for her, probably, right? Unless there's some social dynamic that's, you know, her friends are looking down or something that causes your value to drop. But in that moment, for sure, it's not going to make a significant difference. The age gap is not really the important thing. Now, if you're the same guy and you meet, if you meet Gisele Bündchen, well, first of all, the value gap there, she's a woman, we'll say at her peak 10, right? I mean, it was 9 or 10, whatever, right? So, and now you're a 7, well, she's not gonna be interested in you, even if there's no age gap, right? So, and then we'll take the question that, you know, you meet a woman in the US who's, say, a 7, and yeah, she can be a 7 if she's 22, or she can be a 7 if she's 40. A lot harder for women. We'll go into that later. And that's really going to be the important thing. Obviously, you then have to match well with the woman to have a relationship with her. It's not just about these not really arbitrary scores, but we'll say these objective rankings within, say, a dating market. Obviously, you still have to have that rapport and stuff. So this is the important point, I think, for guys to focus on. It's something that, you know, I was asking my questionnaire for guys who want to live the Zara experience for me, you know, what demographic age range are you interested in dating in? Because, you know, some guys, they really want to have a woman who's, say, in her prime, 20 to 25. That's what they're aiming for. And then you have other guys who are, you know, they only want women over 30. There can be specific reasons for that. Of course, like maybe they're a bit older and they don't want kids, for example, and they want the woman already to have gone through that phase. You know, that they're not under pressure to have more kids. Maybe they have kids from a previous relationship. But guys who are, say, 40, don't have kids, they normally want to go for women who are, you know, maybe between 20 and 30. We'll say overall, because women, as I'm going to go into later, they tend to peak in that mid-20 age period. So let me tell you now a second anecdote. I had a prospective client call with a guy from the US. It was a few months ago at this stage. And I asked him, you know, what age group are you looking for? And I started to group, okay, here in Eastern Europe, you know, Belarus, Ukraine, Russia, they have a lot of beautiful, beautiful women. And then he interrupted me. He said, yeah, I don't want a woman who's really, really beautiful. I thought, okay, what do you mean by that exactly? And he said, well, I consider myself, I think he said he was a 6 in the US, and, you know, if I bring back an 8 to the US, she'll probably leave me when she's got residency and find some other better options. So I didn't find this particularly inspiring. Obviously, in my line of work, would help guys reach their potential. But it did strike me that maybe he actually had a good point, and what he was referring to is international, we'll call it beauty arbitrage, right? So let me explain what I mean. Maybe you are this guy who's a 6 or a 7 and you come here to Ukraine. Now, if you're a guy who has a real man mindset, like Russian guys like to say, so basically you have your stuff together, you understand the local culture here, you know how to behave, you're able to basically project yourself very well, which most Western guys when they come don't. That's one of the things I work with a lot with clients, so that they can adapt to local culture and actually maximize the potential, you know, as quickly as possible. We'll just say you're one of those guys. So, you know, you come here to Ukraine, or maybe it's Belarus, maybe it's Russia, and instead of being that guy who was a 7 in the US, you know, you're able to go to an 8 or a 9 on the local dating market, right? So you're here, you're now a 9, and well, maybe with my help, or you managed to figure it out by yourself, or you had another coach who helped you do that, and you meet a woman who is a 9 in Ukraine, right? So you meet some beautiful woman. She has other qualities, not just beauty. She may be highly educated, and particularly charming and interesting, and you decide, okay, this is the woman for me. It's you build a relationship, you have have good rapport together, and then you bring her back to the US or to wherever your hometown is, and you go back to being a 7. And your Ukrainian woman, at this stage, she's not even a 9. At this stage, she's a 10. She's absolutely Gisele Bündchen level, international model level in your town. And you've gone back to being a 7. Now, there you obviously have a value gap, right? And if you have that value gap and it's quite large, like we'll say 3 points in this case, I mean, actually, maybe she would have been 11 in the hometown, like just the most hottest girl in the, 50 square kilometer radius, or most attractive woman overall, then is that going to be a sustainable relationship? Well, maybe it is if you have a strong enough bond and a strong enough connection, but he was planning to come over for a short amount of time. He wasn't planning to move here, for example. Then the chance of building a really super strong connection, obviously, with a depth of experience, is going to be limited. And then he's back in the US. She's, got her visa or residency, within a short period of time, and she sees that she's, a 10 at the least, and this guy's a 7. Well, there he's still above average, but for her, she has all these other guys who are the singletons, or maybe even married guys who are the 9s and 10s, and she says, well, yeah, maybe this guy served his purpose getting me to the US and allowing me to upgrade, right? So I think that is a significant concern to pay attention to. So basically what you're dealing with there is arbitrage. He is arbitraging by moving here in the first place, or coming over here in the first place. So he's getting here this the women who are a 9 here are going to be off the chart. Well, it's still 9 is very high. Maybe I should have said she's an 8 and then she'd be a 10 back in the US. But anyways, so we see that his value goes up if he knows what he's doing. For actually most guys that come down here, they end up, especially Ukraine in particular, they don't actually do any higher because if you get put into certain categories like the sex tourist category, or kind of desperado wife hunter, unrealistic wife hunter, clueless category, then you're actually probably going to have a lower value than you would back in your hometown, ironically. But we'll see, even with the training, he comes over and he's able to exploit that arbitrage because he's able to, he's not in his own local dating market where he faces stronger competition from other guys, and there's less supply, we'll say, on that other side, demand and supply side of the graph. So he's able to take advantage that's here, which is great, right? So boom, way higher value woman on the on the dating market, we'll say. So higher sexual marketplace value of the woman, and his value also goes up, so that's a great thing. But then the arbitrage, works the other way around when they move back to the States afterwards, because now she's able to arbitrage that. She's not in her local dating market where she was, in my example, the 9, which probably wasn't the best number to take. We'll say an 8. We'll say she was an 8 here, and he actually went down 1 number, and now she's a 10, right? So so you can see the difference, and he's dropped down a few points as well. And then she's like, well, let me arbitrage this because I'm not back home anymore, and then get a higher value guy that way. So that's the kind of arbitrage you see. And maybe this guy actually had a great point, which is that realistically he didn't think that he could keep a woman who's a 9 or 10. I don't think that's really the case. If you have a very strong frame and you have that real man mindset, as the Russian guys like to say, I still think it would work. But definitely it's going to be under pressure if you have that massive value gap, and that's connected to age for sure. So let me explain. This is pretty standard, I think, if you look around in other videos from, say, the Red Pill community, or even from other dating coaches. But basically, women are going to hit their prime between 20 and 25 in general, right? So their maximum value on the dating market is going to hit its peak between those years, 20 to 25. It's not for everybody. There's some women who peak later, some who peak a lot earlier. But in general, that's when women normally hit their peak. That's because that's when they're most fertile. And us as guys, we're more visual, and that's just biology, that we give more value to those women, ceteris paribus to anything else that happens later. And obviously women, then they hit what's known as the wall at a certain point, normally in their 30s. Can be, obviously nowadays with technology that might be expanded a little bit, but more or less, then what happens is their value on the market starts to drop really, really quickly and dramatically once they go past a certain point. And then sometime in her mid-30s, when her fertility starts to drop biologically, her value on the dating marketplace will start to drop really dramatically. It'll actually be a sharp decline. That's why you'll hear a lot of women in their 40s in the West complain that they're invisible to men, for example, or they now suddenly don't have very many options, and you know, it happens a lot. They focus on their career and they expect it to have the same or approximately the same values they had before, even more value because they're, you know, more successful in their career. But that's not how us men react to them. It's a pretty brutal market, and the opposite is actually happening for us as men. Women in general don't assign the same value to us when we're younger, and in general don't have the same amount of resources, don't have the same amount of status, and normally we're not as confident. So these qualities are valued more by women than the visual cues, right? So they have a more mixed bag of criteria than men do. They're not as visual, so when they're looking for a partner. So our value, in fact, is going up, up, up through our 20s. First of all, starting very low if you're a young guy, and then it normally peaks between 35 and 45. So, you know, that's 20 years later than for women. So what happens there? I mean, men also hit a kind of a wall. No one ever talks about that so far as I've seen in, you know, the dating community here online, different dating communities or Red Pill or whatever it happens to be. That basically men, I'm not really sure where we can say where it is, but when you look at the graph, it doesn't drop as dramatically, first of all, and it kind of tapers off. But I think realistically, you know, definitely around 60, you would have to say men are going to hit the wall there. But you see a big difference. Like women are hitting that wall around 35 to 40, while men are hitting it, you know, depends on the guy, how he takes care of himself. Same with the woman, and it's not the same for everybody. We'll say within that range, say, you know, somewhere between 55 and 65, I would guess that would be probably the age range. But it's massive, the difference. And this is where age gap plays into things, because obviously if you're a guy and you have a value of, we'll say, we'll just say that we're talking about a woman back in the States, right? And our friend here, we'll call him Bob, he's a 6, and he meets a woman who's also 6. He meets two women. Both women are 6s. One, he's 40 years of age. The first 6 happens to be 35. Really looking good for her age. And then he has a younger girl who's maybe not as attractive as the 35-year-old, but she has that youth, and she's say 25, right? So they're going to be the same. Now he's 40 and he's hitting his prime. So as far as I can see, really there's not going to be much of a problem with an age gap either way. They're 5 years, 15 years, because the value gap is spot on. Now, of course, there has to be a connection. She has to be a good fit for him. That's one of the things I work on also in my online programs. Slavic Seduction Secrets, for example, we have an LTR test, which is like long-term relationship test. Make sure she is a good fit for you, so you don't waste you know, years of your life with a woman who's might be genuine, might be great, but just not the right fit for you. And you know, time waits for no man, so you definitely don't want to be investing your resources in terms of time, emotions, and financial resources into a relationship that's not going to work, regardless of whether the woman is a genuine person or not, or you know, a good person, not a scammer, not someone who's maybe trying to take advantage of you financially or something like that, or a gold digger, assuming you want to avoid the gold diggers, which most of my clients do in general. So that is important to note, that the value gap is really, really the essential thing to understand. And your value, like say you're a guy and you're 30, well, most likely your value is going to be going up in the future. So you should think about that. Say you come to Ukraine and you meet a woman who's also 30, and you decide to move back to the States. Well, yeah, maybe in the beginning, you know, that then creates this little bit of a value gap, but your value is going to be going up, and her, you know, over the next 10 years is probably going to be going down, most likely. And then maybe it'll end up back in equilibrium again. So you want to think about that if you're a guy who's, say, 30, a younger guy, you know, a millennial, that if you're both on the same level now, going forward, there's going to be a value gap the other way around. That's maybe going to cause a few issues in, you know, if you want to have a long-term monogamous relationship, for example. That's probably going to be difficult because you're going to have a value gap going forward. So definitely understand where your value is coming from as well. Maybe it's just going to be money, for example, right? Maybe you don't have status, maybe you don't have the looks, and it's coming, and you're not you don't have a real man mindset and you're just relying on the cash. And I think this is a stereotype where all these concerns come from with dating in Eastern Europe with respect to an age gap. Like say you are 55, fat, out of shape, and you marry a woman who's like, 30 years of age, in great shape and hot, and you take her from some, small town in rural Ukraine, you bring her to a big city. I remember there was a guy who apparently worked at the same organization as me in Munich, and I met his wife of about 2 months, and she was immediately playing the field straight away. She was sending me messages the next day after meeting me. It's obvious there you have a massive value gap, right? It's not just that it's an age gap, it's exacerbated by an age gap. He's already more or less at the wall. I mean, the guy looked in his 50s and he looked terrible, but he had the money, right? So his value was just coming from the money. And that might increase a little bit, but realize that if that's the case, then, and there's nothing wrong with leading with money, just be aware that it's not going to be a real connection with the woman that you meet in that kind of situation. And anyone who's even promising to set it up with you, hey, I can have hot 25-year-old here in Ukraine, and she will love to just move to the West with you. Well, in all likelihood, that kind of situation is just going to be about money. And there are sugar babe, sugar daddy websites, although they're popular. You don't even have to come to Ukraine to find that. It's basically a form of prostitution, and anyone setting it up, well, yeah, they're kind of like pimps and stuff. So but if that's what you want, then yeah, just do it in full knowledge that's what you're going to get. And just maybe one last point about the wall, because I've mentioned guys around 55 and whatnot. I recently saw Pierce Brosnan, one of my compatriots, who's a huge, obviously, Hollywood star, and now he kind of looks like a grandpa. And you have to remember him as James Bond, like at his peak. It's hard to me really to remember how old he was when he played James Bond. It's probably about 20 years ago at this stage. So I'm guessing he was like maybe mid-40s at the peak, as I said. About 45 maybe. Because he's a guy obviously looked after himself at that time into his 50s, and now he's that bit older, and it's just like his value has also started to drop. So just be aware of that, exactly where in terms of age your value is going to hit your peak, where her value is going to hit her peak, and when it's going to start to drop precipitously, so that you're aware of all those factors. So that's my overview of the value gap in today's vodcast, and how it interacts with, say, the age gap that you'll hear a lot of other channels here talking about. And actually, one of them, he's like a matchmaker, he actually said that the only big age gaps that he'd seen that worked were with guys that actually moved here to Ukraine permanently. Because otherwise, he was saying that, like, if it's on a website, a dating site, whatever, and they're all looking at profiles, then they're just going on the photos and your age and other kind of arbitrary criteria like that, rather than having met you in person and developed that attraction, that bond with you. And he actually has a good point. I think the way to obviously avoid, say, the arbitrage issue and moving back is just to move here. And also, you're going to have a lot more time to meet women. You're not going to be under pressure on a one-week trip trying to meet someone and start a long-term relationship, even if you've developed a pipeline of dates, whatever. I'm going to make a video about why dates as a metric, having dates set up, is the worst way to measure success in dating in Eastern Europe. I'm going to make that video pretty soon, and another podcast for you here. So if you are open to the possibility, and you should be, especially if you are a guy between the ages of 30 and 50 in particular, moving here to Ukraine for 3 to 12 months per year, then I have a few ways that I can help you with that. First of all, I have my high-level consultation group, Slavic Utopia Secrets Ukraine. I have them for also Belarus. Just when I'm filming this, we're about to close enrollment for the Belarusian version, but I'll have the links down below to all of those, and I'm going to do one for Russia almost certainly in the future. And there we work out things like the optimal visa strategy for you, buying real estate here, because there are amazing real estate opportunities. And then obviously, I think most viewers of my channel understand, because I repeat, some of the huge advantages to moving here, like what I point out in today's podcast with the value gap, that you can, I guess, the arbitrage that you can exploit in terms of value gaps by coming here in the dating market. Actually, I also have a podcast about, which I forgot to mention, where I talk about the internationalization of beauty that's been happening because of technology and apps and Instagram and whatnot, and how that's starting to, at the very top level, kind of make it an international market. So you're going to lose a little bit of the arbitrage opportunities. So just be aware of that. I'll link it down below. It's kind of an interesting podcast for a guy who wants to go deeper intellectually on this subject and what's been going on. But also, the Slavic Utopia Secrets series is also down below there in the video description. And we go into things on top of what I've just mentioned, also things like the business opportunities, because there are things that have already worked in the West that haven't been implemented here, and that can present some really, really amazing business opportunities for you. Also cover the health system, because obviously if you spend a lot of time here, you need to have that sort. You don't want to have a bad experience by not understanding what to do if you have an emergency, for example. But also because of the cost of living differentials here, there are amazing opportunities as well to take advantage of the lower cost of living here and actually get healthcare and some other procedures done for a fraction of the cost. We also covered that as well. So that is the end of today's podcast with me. See you very soon in the next one. Do побачення, до свидания, ciao ciao from Nova Kakhovka. Look it up if you've never heard of it. It's actually a really nice spot in the south of Ukraine. See you very soon in the next video.
SAR Experience.